The Spin-off Podcast Network.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government. A podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-off or wherever you get your podcasts.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spin-off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
Nau mai haki mai ki ada fold, e mihi nei ko Duncan Greive tōku ingoa. Welcome to a very special and quite emotional at times episode of The Fold. My guests today are Sam Hayes and Mike McRoberts, who are hours away from commencing their final week as anchors of Newshub's 6 p.m. bulletin as we record this, and as we release this, it's their last day. There is one more hour. Between the two of them, they've spent more than 40 years at TV3 and 3, Newshub and 3 News. Mike McRoberts was working at RNZ when TV3 started broadcasting and joined the channel in 2001. In May, he marked 20 years anchoring 6 p.m, half with Hilary Barry, the balance with Hayes. Sam Hayes walked into TV3 for a month-long internship at 17 and returned after graduation and has never worked anywhere else in media. So both of them just have very, very deep ties to this organisation, and beyond that very public-facing 6 p.m. anchor roles, have worked in, investigative journalism. Mike McRoberts has been a foreign correspondent. They've done a lot more than read the news. Not that reading the news isn't enough. Both of them spoke with real affection and emotion about this organisation. TV3 has, for most of its existence, been the scrappy underdog, but somehow turned that into a real strength. And they dwell on the culture of the place, which produced a style and a tone which has always been strongly differentiated from its rivals at TVNZ. And about the all-in culture, which helped attract and nurture a roll call of some of the most entertaining and idiosyncratic journalists this country has ever produced. And that's the core of what this interview, this episode is to me. That it means a lot. I grew up watching TV3. It was this brand that dared to challenge the former monopoly state broadcaster. It had to be different and succeeded wildly at that. I was a kid who returned to New Zealand from the UK at the age of 10, and I remember when I sort of encountered the channel and started to figure out what it was about, I found it so compelling, had this sense of humour and a playfulness which was deeply attractive. And years later, when I first started the spin-off, I always had 3 in my mind, and particularly Nightline, the sense of passion, a melding of culture and harder news, but having a lot of fun with it along the way. And so, this moment, it's kind of sat heavy with me. I mean, it's obviously so much more so for people who are actually working there, but I think, for audiences too, that this has been the idea that the news, which is the beating heart of TV3, will cease to exist after today. It's just a hard thing to wrap your head around. So Sam Hayes and Mike McRoberts have made time during this busy, heavy week to come on The Fold to talk about all this. They talk about what they'll do next. Sam Hayes will be fronting the brave new 3 News for Stuff, while Mike McRoberts goes on to become the Te Ao Māori editor at the National Business Review. This episode, though, is unavoidably centred on what we lose at the end of today, when this outstanding, scrappy, hard-won news organisation very abruptly ceases to exist. But it's also about what we had when it was around for 35 years of just a very, very singular news organisation that I think everyone in journalism couldn't help but admire and be moved by the way that they went about things. So I'm just really, really grateful to the pair of them for making time this week of all weeks to come and discuss what they did and discuss the legacy of the whole organisation, past and present. So this is Sam Hayes and Mike McRoberts together for one final week talking about one of the greatest newsrooms we've ever had on this special episode of The Fold. Sam Hayes, Mike McRoberts, tēnā kōrua. Welcome to The Fold.
Tēnā koe.
I wanted to start with it's an obvious question and it feels like a heavy way to get into it, but I was wondering if you could characterise your mood and that of the newsrooms as we sort of head into this very kind of heavy final week.
It's a strange time, isn't it, Mike?
It's very weird, and it's been a long time coming too. We've always known this week was on the horizon. Some weeks have felt like torture, and it's been a real weird mix of emotions, as some people have gone on to get other jobs, others still have nothing. And, we're a pretty tight-knit group anyway, so I guess there was, at the start, some relief that we were going through this together, but, it's felt pretty sad over the last few months for sure.
I think, though, that having the 4 months that we've had to process it all and to seek other work, and I mean, it has been difficult, as you said, Mike, to keep the show going every day. There's been some heavy lifting there by everybody across the entire team, but in a way it's been nice to have the time to come to terms with what is happening. Potentially I'm still in a little bit of denial. I know that our last show was on Friday and then that will be it for Newshub. But everyone's been amazing, haven't they? Gosh, we've got such an incredible culture at TV3 within Newshub. Everyone's just supported one another. And because you go through it at different times. You go through those stages of grief at different times. Not everybody is feeling the same way every day. And you just we've kept an eye out for one another and tried to make sure that everyone feels supported when they're having those tough days.
I mean, what I want to do in here is kind of really pick out that culture that has seemed so, you kind of feel it radiating through the screen. But I mean, I can imagine that, and we'll sort of get to that later, but I can imagine going through something like this, you really lean on that, and that would kind of keep you hanging together at a time when it'd be quite easy to fray and kind of break apart.
Yeah, I think that culture has changed over the years, but when I first started 23 years ago, it was very much the underdog up against, the mighty foe. And there was almost a bit of a chip on people's shoulders about TVNZ. I'd come from TVNZ, so I remember one of the producers, I won't mention his name, but didn't speak to me for 6 months, just because he wanted because he wanted to check me out and make sure that I was worthy of being at 3 first. But that evolved, when we started to do well, particularly in areas like foreign affairs, on covering big stories. And our ratings started picking up, and through, probably 2007, 2008, we had a real purple patch. We were regularly beating TVNZ in our demograph, and so that culture changed again. It's become, and I'm really proud of what it's become. It's non-patch protective, so we teach everyone how to do our own jobs. The support is unbelievable. And because it's still such a tight-knit group and smaller numbers compared to most places, I think, that support that Sam was talking about has just always been there, and it's been definitely caught on in the last couple of months. Yeah,
I think one of the greatest parts of the culture at TV3 has been, Mike and I have brought through so many different presenters and taught them absolutely everything that we know about the job that we do. And I know that it's not like that in other places because there's a fear that they might one day take your job. And I remember we actually spoke about this one day, and we agreed that, well, if they're better than us, they should have it. They should have our job, you know.
Oh, I remember agreeing to that. Yeah,
I remember it, Mike. But it's not just us; it's everybody. You know, the Mike Morrow with his investigative skills, and the entire newsroom. Even on a big news day, comes together behind the scenes to make sure that one person that you're seeing on air with their voice on the story and they're doing the live cross, there could be so many people behind it making sure that happens. And then the feedback comes in afterwards. We've got a great WhatsApp group that regularly always gives feedback, and I love that because it's so supportive, and it's a beautiful thing to be part of, and it's so sad that it's stopping.
Yeah, it really is. I wondered if we could go right back to the start, and maybe you could talk to this, Mike, because it sort of, it was the first big private sector newsroom to emerge after deregulation. And as you say, it was up against this Leviathan, the sort of default provider in TVNZ. How was 3 News, and before you came in, when you were in another newsroom looking in at it, how was it perceived, particularly as it sort of developed its own particular voice and character?
I don't think. Well, from the very start, when TV3 first started, and I started in radio before I went into television, so we'd seen what private radio had done in commercial radio, and they'd gone gangbusters. So I think there was always this feeling that a private television channel would do the same. It didn't. And I think it took a long time for people to realise this was going to be quite a quantum shift to get people to change from 1 to 3 on a regular basis, particularly with things around news. But in the end, it was the news that brought people in, and it always has been. 3 has had a bit of a maverick kind of role when it comes to telling news. Great storytellers, but when you think of people like Melanie Reid, for instance, they were out there, like going undercover into and I've just forgotten the name.
Gloriavale. She went into Gloriavale. Yeah. She hitchhiked. She got dressed up in their gear, and then she hitchhiked in there as an undercover ag student or something, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the story. And then she was the first person to come out of there and tell New Zealanders what it was like.
Amanda Miller was another one. They pioneered a different way of storytelling, and that kind of carried on through. So one of the things that should I say this or should
say it? Say it.
It's just us here.
I've always said to younger journalists, if you want to be on telly, go to 1. If you want to tell stories, come to 3. And that's the thing that I love the most is telling stories, and we tell amazing stories, and that's where we get our engagement from. And we're still doing that, and we will be doing that up until the last day.
It's funny, as you said that, it called to mind, I think it was the first episode of Story, the Duncan Garner, Heather Duplessis Allen show that came after Campbell Live, and I feel like he was like cutting off an ankle bracelet. And it was this style of journalism that just was really, really different, and that it wasn't contained in any one person or show, that you could just sort of feel that there was a willingness to kind of get quite creative in terms of trying to land the story. Not like that was the only way they did it, but it was certainly one of them. Where do you think that came from? Like, what was it? People? Was it cultural? Like, what was where did the TV3 vibe originate?
I think part of it came from a lack of resources, and so producers even to this day will say, go out there, get what you can, come back, put it together how you think it should be told, and then well, hopefully, Angus Gillies and the like will give it the green light. And maybe you were supposed to have a 2-minute story and you come back with 6 or 7 minutes and you get away with it because it's good,
You get away with it.
I get away with it. But maybe part of the underdog mentality. I mean, I always remember wherever you went as a TV3 reporter, whether it was 3 News and then going into Newshub, we would be there with our camera operator. So it would be the two of us. And TVNZ sometimes could have, I remember once covering a protest and I looked up and there was one of their camera operators was up in some building, another one was across the road. There were two down, and I thought, how have they got this resource? But then when I watched my story and their story that night, I thought, well, I don't really see that much difference. And maybe they didn't have the time to go through all the footage that they had, or it was too overwhelming. I'm not sure. But yeah, you get away with going and doing the story as you feel like the story needs to be done. And maybe you're up against a deadline and they just say, go for it. Pop that on.
Yeah, I think it was very much out of necessity. And you just look at the numbers, for instance. And so, when you go to 3, there's no safety net. If you're a journalist going out on a story, you don't have a layer of middle management to be producing you or looking over your work. So you're it. Get it right.
That's pretty much it. Subbed, but it's a time thing,
Oh,
and, yeah. I mean, there's definitely a process that they go through and fact checking and making sure it's all good. But yeah, you don't have a team behind you helping you write it. Like, people will come up to me in the street once I started, presenting with Mike, and say, well, who writes your stories? And it's, well, I write my stories. I always have. I don't know. I can't imagine not doing that.
Sam, were you a viewer? But I think you interned there when you were maybe even a teenager. And, do you think that there is a pull to, if you're a viewer, you feel like you identify almost as a TV3 person or a TVNZ person, particularly in a news context. Was that you, or you sort of pulled into the channel that way?
I think so, yeah. I first walked in the doors of TV3 when I was 17 years old. I was studying journalism at the Aoraki School of Media in Dunedin, and part of it was you got to do a month's work experience at the place of your choosing, and me being the audacious teenager that I was, said, I want to do the 6 o'clock news on TV3. They came back and they said, you can do Nightline. And I thought, don't know if I want to do Nightline. No, I thought amazing. Came up to Auckland, walked through the doors, and I just remember, seeing the billboards, the likes of Mike and Carol Hirschfeld and John Campbell and all these amazing journalists, and just thinking, I am the luckiest person on earth that I am sitting here watching them do what they do and just absorbing that knowledge. And then when I worked in current affairs alongside the likes of Melanie Reid and Sarah Hall and Paula Penfold and others, and just learnt that craft of long form storytelling. But I think when now there's a lot of reflection going on, and I think back to when I was a kid and I was mainly a viewer, and then over time I managed to get a job when I was 22, a full-time job, and I've been here ever since. I cannot believe that I have got to experience the things that I have. I mean, I honestly just do not know another job that would have given me a life so rich and wonderful.
Oh, that's beautiful.
That is beautiful.
Don't make me cry. Oh, gosh.
It's interesting. Right? So let's talk a bit about Nightline, because that seemed like, even by TV3 standards, that was, for long periods of time, quite extra. And it created personalities like yourself, like Faria, like Belinda Todd, obviously. There was something about that show which was extremely... it was just so different from the equivalent TVNZ product. What was it like to sort of earn your bones in that environment that was a bit out of the way and had a different rule book?
Well, it was great because it didn't have, the pressure. The 6 o'clock news was just always this, this kind of great, big, important, shiny, oh gosh, don't break it. You cannot be a part of that show until you are extremely good at your job and you will never get anything wrong. And it used to be like that. You would work your way up through Nightline. The kind of feeling was that the bosses weren't watching and we could just get away with whatever we wanted to because they weren't watching. I did get called into Mark Jennings' office a few times, though he was watching. And yes, there were some questions about some of the content. But it was a small team, an amazing team. Actually, Angus Gillies, who was the producer when I turned up when I was 17 for that month of work experience, I remember him saying to me, "Oh, that's right, you're here. How long are you here for?" And I said, "A month." And he goes, "Jesus, are you?" So I spent that month with him. He was producing Nightline when I actually started there as first a reporter in Wellington, and then a year later I started presenting the show at 23. I worked with Gus through that period. Have worked with him the entire time that I've been on 6 with Mike, and he's coming through to the new 3 News show as well, so there's that lovely continuity there. But Gus will tell you that, yeah, I mean, they just wanted to push the boundaries. In fact, if you weren't getting complaints, then you felt like you weren't pushing the boundaries enough.
Sounds like a good mix. So during that period, Mike, you're now 20 years on the big show.
Yeah.
And like you said, that particularly those first few years, they coincided with this period where 3 News had this incredible sort of energy about it. It was the rise of John Campbell and Carol Hirschfeld as well, and then yourself and Hilary Barry as the faces of 6 p.m. And that was also a time where probably the peak of current affairs and news in New Zealand, in terms of the volume of it being created. Can you describe the sort of atmosphere in the newsroom that sort of drove that period for 3 News?
Yeah, it was super exciting. I mean, it was such a buzz to have, this kind of capacity that we now had. Of storytelling. I remember the very first night we had 6 o'clock news with Hilary and myself, then we had Campbell Live, and then 60 Minutes after that. And it was a hell of a lineup. Yeah. And it really felt like we'd made it. We'd hit the zenith in terms of what we were about. And we had a great run for a while there. I think once the global financial crisis hit, things were pulled back a bit. We ended up losing 60 Minutes. But over that period, it was amazing. And it was also at a time when I was doing a bit of travelling as well. So, going to, some of the biggest events in the world, conflicts and disasters.
Yeah, in my head through there, you're sort of half the time you're in a flak jacket and half the time in a business suit.
And it was, it was actually a testament to Mark Jennings, who saw the benefit in that, like he saw the benefit and the importance of having presenters who are journalists. And so he would look for every opportunity to exploit that difference. Presenting the 6 o'clock news from Lebanon during the war in Lebanon in 2006 was a first for New Zealand. And it was amazing. But, it was also about the storytelling. It wasn't just, being there. It was about telling the stories. And that was the kind of premise that I went to all of those events with.
In terms of, I'm sitting here with 2 of them, but there is this thing that 3 has done consistently over basically the whole time of its existence, which is to identify and then particularly to develop talent. I mean, you touched on it earlier, the way that the everyone in the newsroom is so generous with their time and so on. But what is it? What has it been about the culture there that has managed to attract a particular type of person and then spin them up into what feels like the kind of apex version of what they could be as journalists or presenters? It's
a really good question, Duncan. And I mean, I look at my own career and think, why on earth did anybody put me on air in the first place? I was pretty rough around the edges when I arrived up in Auckland. I grew up in rural South Otago, and I rolled my R's,
Did you?
Yeah, used to.
Crikey.
I know. I stopped when I was 17 after
have to go back and look
that.
for those.
Release the tapes.
Yeah.
But I often I've wondered this my entire life. How on earth did I get this opportunity to do this incredible job? And I do not know. And I think that maybe the answer to your question, Duncan, is that the people at 3 have always been willing to take a punt on somebody, to look perhaps beyond what might be a sort of stereotypical view of what a news presenter or a news anchor or a TV journalist might need to look and sound like, and give people the opportunity to develop into those roles. But I don't know, maybe it's just part of the kind of the culture. We've always attracted a different style of person, and now a lot of these wonderful people have ended up at TVNZ.
and with that you get a different level of engagement with the audience too, I think. It's a weird mix of confidence and vulnerability, but I think we've always tried to reflect our audience as well. I remember the first year that I started, 2001, John and Carol were reading, and John was away, so I presented with Carol, and Clint Brown was doing sport. So 3 brown faces on a national network at 6 o'clock. Never been done before, and I didn't think too much of it until my brother texted me during the show and said, "What the fuck is this, Te Karere?"
Quote, unquote.
And I thought, fantastic, but it wasn't given a second thought, and so, I love that. Yeah, we were doing what, probably the state broadcaster should have been doing, but doing it first.
It was 3, wasn't it, that said "Kia ora, good evening" first,
yeah, absolutely.
wasn't it? Not TVNZ, it was 3.
Yeah.
And there's been so many of those sort of firsts over the years in that kind of realm.
Do you know what's funny, though? I remember when I started presenting, and I thought, they got me up to Auckland, and I thought, okay, I was 23 and didn't know how to present the news, and they got me to follow Carly Flynn around for a week while she wrapped up her stint on Nightline. And I just kept saying, but can someone just tell me how to do it? How do I do it? And then I thought that there would be, at some point, I would be put through some kind of training about how to pronounce Māori words, some te reo training. And it never happened, and it was just a matter of figure it out for yourself. I would come and ask you at times, come and ask other people. You just sort of had to learn on the go.
I mean, on some level, that speaks to some things about 6 p.m. you must only be able to learn on the job. What was it that you discovered about that sort of pressure cooker of being live at 6 p.m, whatever has happened that day, whatever might be happening almost simultaneously, that kind of, you can only ever really understand by having done it?
I think the first thing you do is don't think about it. If you were to stop and contemplate who was watching, you'd be rubbish. So, yeah.
And we're the eye of the storm. We're the calm. The chaos happens around us. I was in an edit suite the other day when the news went out at the weekend, and I was listening to, so the lead story, something had happened, the voiceover had fallen off the track, that live cross wasn't working, they were deciding which was going to be the lead. Luckily, there were 3 stories at the top that could have led that day, and I couldn't believe it because I never hear this stuff. We just hear, right, cue, it's your... We get a countdown and off we go. Yes, we know that things are changing, but we're sort of only told once the decisions have been made. There's a lot of chaos behind the scenes, and so the biggest thing I think is trust. You just have to trust that the people around you will do their bit, and it's kind of like a symphony. It all just this beautiful. It's going to sound so cheesy. News, music, that just comes together every day. Every day it's different, but every day it manages to come together. And over time, that trust just gets embedded, and you don't even have to think about it.
Yeah, it does, and we've been lucky because we've had each other as well. So there's a lot of dark humour through the hour, particularly when things are, pretty grim, and you get those nights where you just think, oh my goodness, and even after 35 years of putting out a 6 o'clock bulletin every night, there's still some nights you go home and think, how the hell did we get that to air? But it's part of the beauty of it as well. It's the thing that that adrenaline shot, that performance-related bit of business that you do, which is actually quite infectious. You love doing it.
Kia ora, this is Toby Manhire, here to urge you to tune in to Gone by Lunchtime, a podcast with me, Annabelle Lee Mather and Ben Thomas, tackling the world of New Zealand politics, from policy to polling, from scandal to psychodrama. Listen to Gone by Lunchtime, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network, wherever good pods are sold.
This is climate adaptation.
We are the Pōtiki of the Taiao.
And the words of those keeping the home fires burning.
It's more than just going along and planting some trees. You got to be able to defend that place to the end of your life.
We have the solutions. We just need to come back to the belief in ourselves as rangatira.
Join me, Nadine Hura, and Ruia Āpirehama, the Ko Papa Ko Rangi Series 2, Ahi Ka. Brought to you by Te Komato o Te Tonga, the Deep South Challenge, out now on the Spin-Off Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts.
I mean, how important is that? Because you, Mike, in particular, have been part of two of the sort of 3 or 4 most iconic kind of duos of news presenting. How important is that chemistry that seemed to radiate out of first you and Hilary and then you and Sam subsequently?
You better answer this carefully.
Who was the best?
No, I'm not going to answer that. But look, I think it's really important. It's so important. You can't. I can't even quantify how important it is. But most importantly, it needs to be real. And we've been so lucky with some of the partnerships that we've had, and not just at 6 o'clock, but you look at AM as well with Ryan and Mel, and then Mel and Lloyd. And that's what brings people to you. That's what builds the trust with the audience. That's what builds that relationship. And I should mention AM because obviously that they're off at the end of this week, and the project up until last year have done such a magnificent job of bringing in viewers, of holding them, of having that incredible engagement. My mother-in-law went through treatment for cancer last year, and she said she wouldn't have been able to do it without watching AM in the mornings, and she loves Ryan. So, even my own mum feels that. There's so many people feel that way because of the level of engagement that they have with the presenters.
I had a sort of epiphany of sorts when I had Marlo, my first child, and then again when I had Amaya. I sort of have always come to the news with, we need to get it exactly right and get the edit perfect and make sure that we never stumble over any words when we present. I always wanted it to be this perfect thing. And I realised when I was at home on maternity leave that it's actually about companionship. A huge part of it is that you turn the TV on, whether it's in the morning, at 6 for the late news, and you want to see the people that you know and you trust and that have been there and that have told you about some of the biggest things that have happened in your lifetime. And yeah, that was a really big moment. I remember coming back to the office and talking to, it must have been Richard Sutherland, and he was like, yeah. Yes, that is important, Sam. I was like, yes, but I understand it now. So much better.
I mean, one thing which I think maybe isn't as well understood by viewers is the extent to which 3, along with its underdog status, has also had this kind of rolling financial kind of chaos about it. And, the news has had to happen in spite of that a lot of the time, through no fault of its own. Can you sort of talk a bit about that experience of working at a company where someday you'll be reading the news and it's, there's a bankruptcy or some giant loan that's emergency loan being procured, or, we'll talk about the Mark Weldon era at some point. The actual company that you worked in was quite often intruded in quite powerful ways into the reporting environment.
I just got on with the job largely. What did you do? I mainly
I don't think we've ever known anything different.
Yeah,
it's kind of always been there. So it's part of not having a safety net.
Yeah, and we've always been up for sale. It's happened so many times that if you did focus on it, it would be too distracting. So you're better off just going and getting on with your job. I remember when we went into receivership, and Jennings pulled me into his office. I think I was doing Nightline at the time. Pulled me into his office to sort of reassure me and talk me through it. And I was like, okay, well, thanks, but I'm just going to go and do the show because we're doing the show still, right? Okay, good, I've got work to do, and just carried on. But, I mean, in the time that I've been at TV3, which is coming up 18 years, yes, there have been moments where, you want to go and do a story and you need to travel and the answer has been no because of the cost of it. But then it's kind of been feast and famine. There have been times where it's been the opposite, and okay, great, off we all go. I mean, part of why the shutdown news was so much of a tectonic shift was, I mean, we'd just had a huge team in London covering the death of the Queen, and it felt like a kind of coming of age moment because we were in all of the best live positions, and we were working alongside CNN, who were part of the Warner Brothers Discovery Group, and it was so good that we were finally able to do things the way that we wanted to do them. And I think you could see the difference in the coverage between the two networks at that point, and I felt like we were getting the edge, really getting the edge, and then it all came crashing down.
Well, we'll sort of talk about that in a moment, but I did want to touch on the Weldon era because it felt like quite a profound one for the news side of the business, that where you had this new CEO and who didn't seem to understand or be particularly, interested in news, had a vision for the company that was quite different, didn't have nearly so much news in it. What was it, what was it like to work through that and to have, big iconic parts of the business kind of, like dismantled in front of you in some ways?
Oh, it was terrible. I think Weldon had some good and interesting thoughts, but he was just terrible at delivering them. And we were in a full-on crisis mode. I remember when Hillary resigned, a mate of mine came around and he said, "It's time to point the missiles at Cuba. What do you want?" kind of thing, because we'd lost John as well. We'd lost Jennings. It felt like the whole place was in crisis, and I said, "Well, we need to get rid of Weldon. That's what we need to do. I don't care about extra money or anything. This is the time to do it." So I that weekend sent an email to the board outlining, and had some help with outlining why it wasn't working. Just from a pure business point of view, we had a staff turnover at that stage of 35%. And we're losing really good people, and we're a business that ultimately sold content, and we were getting to a stage where we couldn't provide content. And I thought I was kind of writing my own letter of resignation at the same time, but I thought, it just can't go on. I didn't. It's the only time I think I've ever thought we didn't have a future. And so, as it turned out, 2 days later he walked. So and things picked up, but it took a lot out of us. It was. I just can't even think of how many really good people we lost. Years and years and years of experience. But we've built back from there, and I really felt we were starting to hit our straps again, which was great.
Let's talk about the news, and it sounds like that that it was genuinely a shock that you'd had this. Finally, it felt like there was some kind of resolution after the MediaWorks sort of breakup and becoming part of this much bigger entity. Yeah, talk me through that day and the days afterward, and how the extent to which, given that you'd been through receiverships and Weldon and so on. Was it obvious from the start that this time was different?
Look, I think because of what happened during the Weldon era with shows like Campbell Live and my own show Third Degree at the time, we'd seen it time and time again. When a proposal for a shutdown came along, you weren't going to be changing anybody's mind. And we'd just seen it with the project before Christmas. And so when they said that Newshub is going to be shut down, there was a valiant effort by some amazing people within the newsroom, and there was a lot of input from across the whole newsroom, but that core group that tried to save something. But I think that all of us knew that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, and that's been quite hard to get your head around. speaking to some former colleagues, and they said, "Oh, it'll take a bit of time to get through your system." And I said, "Yeah, but when you left, it was still there. We don't have anything to go back to. All the people that I've worked with over the years are going. So,
that was so hard. When you'd arrive at work, look around the newsroom, and think it's everybody. It's every last person in here is being made redundant, and not just the newsroom, but 75% of the company. It really was unfathomable initially.
And a lot of them have nothing to go to. That's the hardest thing. It's deeply upsetting. But then, this happens in other industries as well. They just happen to be my friends and my colleagues. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess the thing that's hard, and this is why, I'm curious about that sort of persistent line from some politicians and so on, that it's an innovation, that the media needs to innovate more, because that would imply that there is something else that's sort of rising to replace it, notwithstanding that stuff is going to produce a 6 p.m. bulletin, but just in terms of the raw numbers of people out there chasing news, and by God, the three News and Newshub ever really chase for exclusive stories, that there isn't something coming, and that those people aren't walking across the road to some new technology-enabled startup for the most part.
Yeah, it feels like a really transitional period for media. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens. The television model feels a bit broken. It's not just us who are struggling, TVNZ clearly as well. And I don't even know these days if it's about how many people are watching. It's clearly about where advertisers want to put their money. So I don't know what happens from here. It's going to be interesting. I hope our people find a home. Sam's probably in a great position to lead some sort of transformation. I don't know where to or how it goes, but yeah, it feels like we're in a bit of a evolution period. Hopefully.
Hopefully. But before we go, I just have a couple more questions. And I wondered if you could actually, in turn, speak about the new roles that you're going into, both of which are pretty exciting in their own way, as much as they must be tinged with, poignance at the end of what is passing with 3 News.
Yeah, well, as Mike was saying, we as a group, as Newshub, when the news was announced of the shutdown, wanted to try and salvage something. And I'm just so grateful that stuff has come along and had the guts to take on a big project like this. And there are quite a number of really great people from Newshub that are coming along to make this new 6 o'clock program. It's going to be quite strange, I think, for viewers, because Newshub's ending, Mike and I won't be there, but that's on July 5th, but on July 6th, there will still be a 6 o'clock bulletin. I'm still going to be there. So it's, and there will be lots of people that I do work with today that will be on that program. So there will be continuity of sorts, but it will be different. And I think what our great challenge is exactly what Mike was talking about. It is, we've largely made a bulletin at 6 o'clock and expected the audience to come and find us there, because that's how it always was. That's how many of us grew up, and that's was the business model. That has changed drastically. There is still huge value in the 6 o'clock news, and a lot of advertising revenue there, which is why a lot of this has been so perplexing. But there are also lots of people that come up to me on the street and say, I don't have a television. I don't watch TV. I use my phone or my laptop, or I'm only streaming. And we need to be able to take the news to those audiences where they are. We still need to make great journalism, and that is exactly what we're going to do. We still need to get the best pictures, and that's exactly what we're going to do. But with this sort of merger, if you like, of some of us from Newshub, the legacy team, and then when you put that together with the hundreds of staff journalists right around the country, and they're in places that Newshub was never able to be, hopefully we're going to come up with a really good show that Kiwis are going to want to tune into and watch. And I just want it to be something that my colleagues will be proud of.
I can see that. And, it's interesting, though, that the fact that people come up to you to tell you that they don't have a TV, obviously, that they recognise you from somewhere.
Yeah.
So they're seeing you on
and that
somehow.
news they're watching on their phone, that came from somewhere. The same people that make the 6 o'clock news.
Yeah.
What about you, Mike? You've taken on this Te Ao Māori editor at the MBR role, which is quite much more different again, and represents a sort of journey you've been on over the past few years. Yeah, tell us about that.
So I think it was even on the night that it was announced that Newshub was closing, my 22-year-old daughter Maya said to me, "Dad, whatever you do next doesn't have to be forever." And I thought it was really sage advice for a man whose current CV still has his 1983 school cert results on them.
And was written on a typewriter.
Yeah, written on a typewriter, yeah. And that doesn't mean that this is something that I'm not going to do forever. It really just gave me the opportunity to look at and go, okay, now's the time to take a risk, do something I really want to do. I knew that I wanted to do something with kaupapa Māori. It's been a life-changing journey for me in the last couple of years. Todd Scott had been in touch a few times from the MBR, and I really like what they do. They aren't beholden to advertising or government funding. It's all subscription. And so that felt like a good fit for me, and I get to create something. Which is this Te Ao Māori role, doing stories around the Māori economy. I've got a few other bits and pieces I've got on my horizon as well. So I'm really looking forward to it. And I wanted to leave Flower Street TV3, I guess under my own steam. Mana's a big thing for me, and I feel really good about what I've done. In fact, Todd rang me last night and said, I know it's going to be a really sad week, but maybe you should couch it in a way that celebrates what you've done and what your colleagues have done. And I think that's right. I wouldn't have traded my television career with anyone. I've had a fantastic opportunity and career. So when I walk out there on Friday night, it's going to be with really good feelings, with a nice wairua.
That's beautiful. I wonder if we could close with the pair of you and sort of just each sharing a memory of from your time that sort of will seem to sum up the sort that wairua, that feeling that was generated by your time at 3 News and Newshub. Whether it's a story or a colleague, a particular era, something that kind of captures what it meant to you.
You know how long we've been working in the media, right, Duncan? It's quite a long way to look back. I was actually thinking, Mike, the other day, so when I was presenting Nightline, and so in my early 20s, do you remember the Napier siege that Jan Molinar shot and killed some police officers, and it went on for, I think, almost 2 days. And it was the first time that I was put on get in, you're on a plane, you're going. A whole bunch had already gone for the 6 o'clock news. I got there, had to do the show live as the siege was still unfolding, and all sorts of things went wrong. There was supposed to be an auto cue, and I remember Mike had said to me, if you're ever going to use the auto cue, in the field, make sure you have time to test it and practice, because it's very different in the studio. Well, at 3 minutes to on air, it still wasn't going, and I don't think it ever did get going, and so I just had to kind of do it all on the fly. And I remember going back to wherever we were staying afterwards, and this is late now after the news, and you guys must have been up having a drink after dinner. And I remember Mike said to me, "Hey, great job." And I was like, "No, it was terrible. Oh my gosh, that was just a disaster." And you said, "No, it was good." And that was a good lesson, actually, always to go back and watch. If you really thought it was bad, go back and watch, because it often wasn't as bad as it felt at the time. But we got talking, and you asked me, Mike, you said, what do you want to do? God, I'm going to get so emotional thinking about this. what do you want to do with your career? And I said, well, one day I would love to do current affairs, 60 minutes like you do, but I'm not that person, I'll never be able to do that. And Mike said, of course you are. Of course you can. And yeah, I did.
And you bloody did.
And I did, yeah. That was when we lost. I came in, I actually took the job as a 60 Minutes reporter, and then we lost the 60 Minutes name because the network didn't buy the CBS deal, and it was part of the CBS deal, and so we had to call it something different. So I never got to be a 60 Minutes reporter, but I did get to do current affairs for about 5 years and reported for the show and presented the show like Mike was doing back then. Yeah, and I think that kind of just sums up what it's been like to be at 3. Incredibly supporting and, all the things that you never thought you'd get to do.
Yeah.
Getting to do them somehow.
Oh my gosh, there've been so many different times. Yeah. Actually, I remember covering the 2016 presidential election in New York when Trump beat Hillary Clinton, and I was there, kind of just with a camera in Times Square, and then up rocks Kate Roger, our beautiful, wonderful wahine toa, who does entertainment. Of course, she had been on a junket, and so she came in to help me. And in a chock-a-block Times Square, ran kind of interference, got some talent for me. And, I love Kate anyway. She's a really good friend. But, that's just how we roll. If you're there and you can help, you do.
You do it.
Yeah.
I remember that night. Oh, it was so good. Tom McRae and I were presenting from the studio, and we'd gone on for hours and hours and hours, and Trump hadn't come out, Hillary hadn't come out, and we wanted to stay on, and we just kind of refused to go off air. We finally, I think it was it 2:00 in the morning in America when Trump finally came out and did his speech, and someone showed me this brilliant photo afterwards, and it was our two TVs in the office. One was on us, one was on TVNZ, and we had Trump speaking, the new president of America, and they had a rerun of MasterChef. And we'd stayed, and I remember coming off air, and I said, well, let's just keep going. We'll go back to Mike. We hadn't heard from Hillary yet. We'll just keep. And Richard Sutherland had to talk me down. He was like, it's been 6 hours. We're done now. Okay. I loved it.
And if you go through my last cross, as it becomes apparent that it looks like Trump's going to win, you might be able to hear a voice that sounds remarkably like Kate Rogers in the background going, what the?
Oh, yes, we have a topsy-turvy world, don't we?
Oh, my God, they honestly just could not sum up the renegade organisation that 3 News has been for 35 years more perfectly. Hey, thank you both so much for coming up, and I'll let you go back to do this very charged final week now. But as someone who grew up watching the channel, who felt a real kinship with it through it as a news product, I just thank you both, and everyone who's worked at Newshub and 3 News for making that thing that has meant so much to so many for so long.
Mihi ana kia koe, Duncan.
Thanks, Duncan. Ngā mihi.
Talofa lava. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spin-Off. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spin-Off member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spin-Off. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spin-Off member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.